again.
Hallelujah. Praise you, Jesus.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Miqra.
Shalom.
So we are on a journey to discover the ancient paths of our faith.
Amen.
And this has really been something that's been going on throughout this generation, probably for the past 40 years. This going back, one of the problems that we have in Christian theology is that Christian theology often ignores what is written in the Old Testament law and prophets and writings. And a lot of the theology is based on an interpretation of Paul or an interpretation of Jesus or whatever, without the benefit of understanding the backdrop to the story, the New Testament story. And so we're proclaiming the ancient paths of our biblical roots because we want to have a full understanding of what the New Testament is really saying. And the only way we can do that is to understand that the writers of the New Testament, that the witnesses of the Messiah, were all Torah-based. They were all based in the Hebrew Scriptures. And so what they said and wrote about is always based upon the Hebrew Scriptures. There was no New Testament in the time of Paul. In the time of the writers of the New Testament, they were writing the New Testament. They didn't have one to write about it, if you know what I'm trying to say. So we're discovering the ancient past, and this is going to be helpful in our topic today, which is the pagan festival of Halloween. Today is October 31st in the year 2020, and tonight a lot of people are going to be going around this neighborhood and around neighborhoods all over the United States and even around the world. They're going to be celebrating this thing they call Halloween. And so we want to talk about this today and ask the question, which is my subtitle here: is this a time when believers should celebrate trunk or treat, or trick or treat, as it were? And so we want to have a biblical basis for what we do. We're not going to just follow old pagan traditions, even though Christians want to Christianize the holidays that they celebrate: Christmas and Easter and Halloween and others. Christians believe and teach that God can take anything evil and turn it into good. So we're going to evaluate the legitimacy of this statement. Does God take that which is evil and turn it into good for us? Or are there separations that we need to observe and follow? Because the Father does not want to lead us into unequal yokes in our marriages and our relationships, and into making pacts and deals and agreements with unbelievers in such a way that we would be drawn into their way of thinking and be trapped by the oaths and the agreements that we make with them. Christians also believe and teach that any of the pagan holidays can be used by God for worshiping Him. Christians know the history of Halloween. I mean, they're not going to deny some of the things that I'm going to present to you today, but it doesn't matter to them where these traditions came from, because they believe that on account of Messiah's death for us on the tree, that He has cleansed things that used to be unclean. You know, like foods, He's cleansed foods, or meats that Father said were unclean, and the holidays and traditions, and a lot of those things. Christians believe that Christ has set us free to be able to celebrate those things and to do it unto Him. And so I would suggest, is it true that we can do, because of Messiah's death on the tree, that we can do those things even though in the past Elohim has said, don't do those things. Did Christ cleanse those things? So we're going to relate that thought and that question to the history of Halloween, and we're going to see what the scriptures have to say about whether or not we should be celebrating, along with the world, this holiday called Halloween. What is Halloween? And some of these slides, I mean, you can look up yourself online. You can find a lot about the history of Halloween. But I just want to real quickly go through some of these things so as to lay a foundation for what the scriptures tell us to do, as opposed to Halloween. What is Halloween? Wikipedia says Halloween, also known as All Halloween or All Hallows Eve, and sometimes even All Saints Eve, is a celebration observed in many countries on the 31st of October. That's today, on the eve of the Western Christian feast of All Hallows Day. The word hallow there is the same word as the King James Version in Matthew chapter 5, where it says, hallowed be thy name. Hallowed, it means to make holy or to set apart as holy. And so All Hallows Day is what is described here as a Western Christian feast used to celebrate the saints of the past, the holy ones, the hallowed ones, and so it's called, November 1st is called All Hallows Day. It begins the observance of All Hallowtide, the name or the time in the liturgical year, that is the Christian calendar year, dedicated to remembering the dead. And this is an important thing that we need to understand about Halloween. They remember the dead. They remember the saints, the hallows, the holy ones, and the martyrs and all the faithful departed. So Halloween, or All Hallows Day, the day afterward, November 1st, is a time of remembering and celebrating the dead on the liturgical calendar, which is the Christian calendar. So in other words, Christians have adopted a holiday so that they can celebrate the dead. So we're gonna look into that here in a couple minutes, and we're gonna see that the Father has told us certain things about the dead and calling upon the dead. So, what is Halloween? Again, one theory holds that many Halloween traditions may have been influenced by ancient Celtic harvest festivals, particularly the Gaelic festival Samhain, which may have had pagan roots. Some scholars, other scholars, hold that Samhain may have been Christianized as All Hallows Day. So there's a little bit of confusion even among the scholars as to the exact source of what's celebrated on October 31st and November 1st. Other academics believe that Halloween began solely as a Christian holiday, being the vigil of All Hallows Day. In other words, the evening before November 1st, in which the Christians celebrate the dead and call upon the dead and recite, the good things that the dead have done. So, in both of these slides, we noted that there was a Celtic harvest festival, and the Christians have Christianized this to make it a Christian harvest festival. So my question to you is, what about Halloween? Are we supposed to, I'm sorry, here's my slide. Should pagan holidays be Christianized? Or as they have done with October 31st and November 1st, do the Christians have the right and the authority to Christianize a pagan holiday? The appointed times of Yahuwah describe for us the times and seasons in which Elohim's people are to honor him with worship. He's given us these holy days or holidays in Leviticus 23, and they're described there. And one of those is the fall festival of tabernacles, or Sukkot, which is the harvest festival. in just before the winter. All the rest of the crops that have been growing in the fields and so forth and on the trees are harvested, and so Father has given us the Festival of Tabernacles in order to celebrate the harvest of the fields. And so why, if the Father has given us a special holy day for that very purpose, why do we need to create another harvest festival on some other day other than the time and season that the Father has given in order to celebrate the things the Father has given us? Which is one of the reasons why Christians believe that Halloween has some legitimacy, because it came from a tradition of a harvest festival. So these are the holidays that Father wants us to rejoice and remember Him by. And there's a verse in, actually two of them, but I'm going to just recite one. Deuteronomy 12:32 says this: "See to it that you do all I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it." So what the Father is indicating here is that He's given us these holy days, these times of celebrations, and He doesn't want us to add to those celebrations. He doesn't want us to take away from those celebrations. But that's exactly what the Christian world has done in making Halloween legitimized, at least in their sight, and something that they encourage Christians to do, to celebrate a harvest festival after Yah instead of the festival that the Father has given to His people to celebrate. It seems to be a substitute for doing the real thing. It's the attempt of the enemy to change the times and the seasons, which is an expression we find in the book of Daniel regarding the beast. And so the beast, the enemy, wants us to change our holiday seasons. And that's really what Halloween is all about. It's about a tradition that was raised up by men, by the command of men to do, instead of doing what the Father told us to do. And so this in and of itself would be reason to say Halloween is not legitimate for the believer, for the Christian church, for anyone who places their faith in the Messiah of the Scriptures. Because the Father has strictly informed us that He doesn't want us to change these things that He's given us, neither to add to it or to take away from it. Halloween activities. Let's take a brief look at this. Halloween activities include trick-or-treating, or the related guising and souling, which guising means to be in disguise, to wear costumes, attending Halloween costume parties, carving pumpkins into jack-o'-lanterns, lighting bonfires, apple bobbing, divination games, really important here, divination games, playing pranks and visiting haunted attractions, telling scary stories, as well as watching horror films. Now these are all things that I did when I was young, when I was a kid, because I thought it was all just fun, and no one gave me any reason not to do these things. But I'm here to present some reasons why we should not be doing these things, scriptural reasons. So let's go back to the trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating, I'll get to that in a second. Trick-or-treating is an activity in which the children would bring songs on this evening, on October 31st. The children would bring songs or skits or plays or something to entertain the people at the festival, and in return they would receive food or gifts, toys or whatever. And that's kind of where trick-or-treating came from. They would present themselves, and then they would receive something in return for the entertainment that the children would provide for the rest of the folks. So trick-or-treating nowadays is about going from house to house and saying trick or treat, right? And then everyone knows that they're supposed to have a bowl of candy, and then they pass out the candy to the children. The trick part, I'm not sure, where that came from, but the trick part is that teenagers, and I know I was guilty of this, so I know a little bit about it. You would toilet paper somebody's house if they didn't, or egg their house, or do some sort of damage to their house if they didn't give you, the treat, the candy bar, the whatever that you came to their door for. And so that's the trick or treat part. The guising or Halloween costume parties are about that too. And what really disturbs me about the costuming is that the witch costume is the most popular among all the costumes at Halloween. And yet we're told we're not to have anything to do with divination and witches, and I'm going to show you a couple of scriptures on that in just a moment. But Halloween encourages people, adults and children, to disguise themselves in order, they're doing it in the name of fun, but it really comes from this pagan custom of disguising ourselves and taking on another personality, if you will. The personality of the witch, or the personality of the goblin, or the personality of whatever the popular cartoon of the day is. Because little children dress up as their favorite cartoon character, right? And all of these other things. And so we're taking on the image of something that is not holy and that is not godly in order to have this fun that Christian churches encourage people to have. Carving pumpkins, lighting bonfires. By the way, the word bonfire comes from bone fire. It was about the burning up of bones in a massive fire altar on these holidays. Halloween, and I think they did this at Christmas as well. They would have bonfires, and the bones of the dead would be burned up in these fires. Apple bobbing, divination games. Apple bobbing is interesting because I heard recently of a Christian church that not only did apple bobbing, but they did hot dog bobbing, which I probably don't have to explain has other suggestions and implications where people are reaching down into the bowl with their face to try to grab a hold of the hot dog. I find that very disturbing that Christian churches are doing this kind of thing. And they're doing it again in the name of fun, but what they're doing is suggestive, and it's provocative, and it's just outright wrong for the reasons that I don't think I need to explain. Divination games, haunted attraction, horror films. In many parts of the world, the Christian religious observance of All Hallows' Eve included attending church services and lighting candles on the graves of the dead. These remain popular, although elsewhere it is a more commercial and secular celebration. So the Christian churches have kind of adopted and adapted the Halloween festivities into something that's more in liking with what they're trying to preach or teach or suggest as a way of living. And yet the lighting of candles on the graves of the dead surely goes back to the practice of calling upon the dead. And I'm gonna look at a slide about that in a moment as well. Trunk or treat, and this was in the title of the message today. What is trunk or treating? It's Wikipedia says some organizations around the United States and Canada sponsor a trunk or treat on Halloween night, or on occasion a day immediately preceding Halloween, or a few days from it on a weekend, depending on what is convenient. Where trick-or-treating is done from parked cars, from one car to another car in a local parking lot, which is often at a school or a church. And so this annual event began in the mid-1990s as a fall festival for an alternative to trick-or-treating, but became trunk-or-treat 2 decades later. The activity involves the open trunk of a car displaying candy and often games and decorations some parents regard trunk-or-treating as a safer alternative to trick-or-treating. You remember the scare back in the 90s and in those times where kids were finding razor blades and pointed objects in the candy that they were eating, and they were becoming injured from these things. And so the Christian church has decided we're going to have our own Halloween trick-or-treating, and we're going to do it from our parking lot. And that's how they did it, evidently, is people would drive their cars to the parking lot and have candy and treats and so forth in their trunks, and the children would just go around the parking lot picking up these odds and ends from all of the church people that were attending. So that's what trunk or treat was. I didn't know until today. I had to look it up. I didn't know what trunk or treating was, but that's where it came from. It was from doing it out of the trunk of your car in the Christian parking lot. So the neo-pagans and Wiccans. Neo-pagans is a word that just means the new style of paganism in our day. Wiccans are basically witches and warlocks. They're those who worship Satan. And so just a word about the neo-pagans and Wiccans and the relationship between them and Halloween. There is no consistent rule or view on Halloween amongst those who describe themselves as neo-pagans or Wiccans. Some neo-pagans do not observe Halloween, but instead observe Samhain on November 1st. Other neo-pagans do enjoy Halloween festivities, stating that one can observe both the solemnity of Samhain in addition to the fun of Halloween. Solemnity, the holiness of Samhain. I don't know how they come up with that, but nevertheless, some neo-pagans are opposed to the celebration of Halloween, stating that it trivializes Samhain and to avoid Halloween because of the interruptions from trick-or-treaters. So in other words, there's all sorts and varieties of the way that the pagans celebrate Halloween in the 1st of November today, in our world today. The Manitoban writes that the Wiccans don't officially celebrate Halloween, despite the fact that October 31st will still have a star beside it on any good Wiccan's day planner. So it's on their calendars, but some of them don't celebrate it anyway. Starting at sundown, Wiccans celebrate a holiday known as Samhain. Samhain actually comes from the old Celtic traditions and is not exclusive to neo-pagan religions like Wicca. And while the traditions of this holiday originate in Celtic countries, modern-day Wiccans don't try to historically replicate Samhain celebrations. Now here's the interesting part of this statement. Some traditional Samhain rituals are still practiced, but at its core, the period is treated as a time to celebrate darkness and the dead. A possible reason why Samhain can be confused with Halloween celebrations. So again, there's this association between October 31st and November 1st with the dead, the celebration of the dead. What is Samhain? Samhain is an Irish or Scottish Gaelic term. It refers to the Gaelic festival marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, or the darker half of the year. Traditionally, it is held on November 1st, but with celebrations beginning on the evening of October 31st, as the Celtic day began and ended at sunset. So that's why the November 1st holiday begins at sunset on October 31st, and that's why our children go out trick-or-treating after dark on October 31st. Or at least that's been the traditional way of doing it. This is about halfway between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. And if you'll look at your calendar, you'll see that that's true. The autumn equinox is around September 21st, and the winter solstice December 21st. So roughly halfway in between is today, is October 31st and November 1st. It is one of the 4 Gaelic seasonal festivals, along with a few others. Historically, it was widely observed throughout Ireland, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. Ireland, Scotland. So this is where the tradition came from. Other than the pagan roots of it, which occurs long before this, but during the time of Ireland and Scotland's heyday, this was one of the celebrations that the Christians of those countries celebrated. Why bonfires? As at Beltane, special bonfires were lit. They were deemed to have protective and cleansing powers, and there were rituals involving them. Like Beltane, Samhain was seen as a liminal time, which means when the boundary between this world and the other world could more easily be crossed. And so now we're seeing the connection at this time of year, because we're going into the dark part of the year, that it's easier to contact the dead, that the boundaries between the living and the dead are kind of let down a little bit and can be more easily crossed. And that's why this time of the year was chosen as that time of celebrating this harvest festival. Yeah, that's what they say. That's what Wikipedia describes for us. This meant that the Eos, or the spirits or fairies, could more easily come into our world. And so now here we're talking about spirits and fairies. In other words, the evil spirits, fairies being another form or description of the evil spirits that are unseen, that they could easily come into our world. And so most scholars see the AOC as remnants of the pagan gods and nature spirits. Again, a connection to paganism and of crossing over the boundary that the scripture gives us about contacting the dead. Because we see over and over again in the scriptures that the reason that we're forbidden to contact the dead is because the dead can't really be contacted, at least in my view, the way I understand it, but that what we're really contacting, if we do those things, is evil spirits. And evil spirits are telling us, or disguising themselves as our dead loved ones that are in the grave, and then speaking to us a mixture of truth and lies. And so that's why we're told not to do it. At Samhain, it was believed that they needed to be appeased to assure the people and their livestock surviving the winter. So there was a superstitious element to it as well, that if we could contact the dead, they're going to help watch over our stuff during the winter so that our livestock don't die. Offering of food or drink were left outside for them. Kind of almost sounds a little bit like Christmas and the tradition of leaving food for Santa in your house. But you know, maybe this was the original source of the trick-or-treating, is that they would leave these foods and drinks out for the souls of these dead that they intended to contact. And yet the souls of the dead were also thought to revisit their homes seeking hospitality. Feasts were had at which the souls of the dead, of dead kin or dead relatives, were beckoned to attend, and a place set at the table for them. So again, this connection with contacting the dead. I want to look at a couple scriptures from the Old Testament about what's so wrong about this, about contacting the dead and trying to have communication with the dead. Leviticus 19:26 tells us about divination, where it says, "You shall not eat anything with the blood," and then the last phrase, "nor practice divination or soothsaying." And these two words here, translated practice divination, it's the Hebrew word nachash. And if you remember from Genesis 3, nachash is the Hebrew word for serpent. The serpent that tempted Eve in the garden. And so it says you should not practice nachash. And what I think that means is that we're not supposed to be doing the works of the devil. And that's what practicing divination is that the devil is calling upon spirits and he's doing things illegally that the Father doesn't want us to partake in. He's practicing deception through his communications. I'm talking about Satan, the devil, the serpent. He practices deception on people through his words, through his trickery, and through his wiles. And so we're not to do those same things, and that's what it means to practice divination. It means to act like the serpent, or to hiss like the serpent. We're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to speak like the serpent in deception. And then the word soothsaying comes from the word anan, which literally means to bring clouds or to gather clouds together. And it may be a reference to the idea of calling upon the spirits illegally, calling upon heaven or the spirits that are in heaven to come down and to assist us in whatever it is that we're seeking. That's what soothsaying is. It's to call upon them to help. So we're not supposed to be practicing the works of the devil or calling upon spirits to give us answers to our questions about what we can't see. And thus, divination and soothsaying is forbidden. Deuteronomy 18:10-12 gives us a little more expanded explanation of this prohibition in Scripture. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire. I wonder if that was part of the bonfire or bone fire experience of the pagans, is that they would send their children into the bonfire. And there would literally be a bone fire going on there because their children would burn up in the fire as an act of worship to their gods, as they're calling upon the gods. So no one is to practice passing his son or daughter through the fire, or one who uses divination. There shall not be found among you anyone who does this, who uses divination. Same word as we just saw in the last slide, the word nachash, or doing the work of the devil. One who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, which also can mean astrologer, consulting the stars for information about ourselves, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. So here clearly, divination is strictly forbidden by the Father in heaven for those who call upon him. For whoever does these things is detestable to Yahuwah. And because of these detestable things, Yahweh, your Elohim, will drive them out from before you. And so this is another really important and strong reason why Christians, believers in Messiah, should not be celebrating Halloween, because it really comes from a practice of divination, of calling up the dead to bring us answers, which is strictly forbidden by Torah. Trick or treat. Mumming and guising were part of the festival and involved people going from door to door in costumes or in disguise, often reciting verses in exchange for food or other entertainments. The costumes may have been a way of imitating and disguising oneself from the Eos Sea, the fairies or elves. Divination rituals and games were also a big part of the festival and often involved nuts and apples, which is why we have nuts and apples and other candies and tasty foods at Halloween, is because it all comes from this ritual of the bobbing for apples, divination rituals, calling upon the dead, putting candles on the graves of the dead. In the late 19th century, Sir John Rees and Sir James Fraser suggested that it was the Celtic New Year, and this view has been repeated by some other scholars. So trick-or-treating is basically give me what I want or I'll curse you. That's the modern day form of it. But it comes from divination. How does Elohim want to be worshipped? And we find this scripture, and we're going to look at some scriptures now. That was basically it for the information I wanted to give about Halloween and its background, where it came from. But so now I want to look at a little more scripture about why Halloween is wrong and what the Father wants us to do in worshiping Him. Does He want us to follow those pagan customs and practices and rituals? Or does He have a specific instruction, panel of commandments that He's given to us to worship Him in a way that's pleasing to Him? And of course, Exodus chapter 20 is the first of those. I am Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Or we could translate that, beside me. Before me or beside me. You're supposed to have no other gods, period. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, Yahuwah your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. And so here's a very stark contrast between creating our own harvest festival and celebrating that and calling upon the dead, or should we be following Yahuwah's commandments? Those who love Yahuwah, who love the Lord our God, are going to follow His commandments and not the traditions and customs of men that were based in pagan ritual worship, burning their children, their sons and daughters in the fire, and calling upon the dead to help them and to give them the answers to their future. And even calling upon the stars, the created things, as a means of ascertaining our future, or what's going to happen to us even today. That's what astrology, the newspapers publish astrology stuff every day, the horoscopes, telling you what's going to happen to you today, depending upon what month you were born in. All of that is strictly forbidden by the Father. He doesn't want us worshiping or depending upon the planets or the stars or anything else that is a created thing in order to know our future. He has told us our future. He has given us the prophecies, and He's told us of His plans to prosper us and to bless us. And so all those things that we really need to know, He's given to us so that we can know those things. We don't have to be consulting the dead on behalf of the living. In the fourth Gospel, chapter 4, the Messiah was talking to this Samaritan woman. And she said to him, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, or Mount Gerizim, but you Yehudim, you Jews, claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. And Yahushua declared, believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. And that time is today. You Samaritans worship what you do not know, but we worship what we do know. For salvation is of the Yehudim, and yet a time is coming, and now has come, when the true worshipers, and this is the word for us about Halloween, the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. Elohim is spirit, and His worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. And that's in the fourth Gospel, chapter 4. And so my question then is Halloween a form of worshiping in spirit? What spirit does Halloween promote to worship? It's the spirits of the dead, the spirits of the evil ones that are invisible to our naked eye. That's the form of worship that Halloween promotes, worshiping the evil one and all of his cohorts. How about in truth? Is Halloween a form of worshiping in truth? And of course the clear answer to that is no. The truth is in what the Father has presented us and the things that He's given us to worship Him in the way that He desires. And so Halloween doesn't promote worship in spirit or in truth, but is in fact quite contrary to the ways that the Father wants us to know Him and to worship Him and to celebrate Him. In Deuteronomy 8, we have warnings against false worship. If you ever forget Yahuwah your Elohim, and I'm beginning in chapter 8, verse 19, if you ever forget Yahuwah your Elohim and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations Yahuwah destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying Yahuwah your Elohim. Jumping to Deuteronomy chapter 11. So if you faithfully obey the commands I am giving you today to love Yahuwah your Elohim and to serve him with all of your heart and with all your soul, and I would suggest that Halloween doesn't promote this at all, loving Yahuwah. It promotes loving divination and pagan ritual and the traditions of men rather than Yahuwah, who gave us the clear instructions. He says, if you faithfully obey the commands, then I will send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rains, so that you may gather in your grain, new wine, and oil. I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. So whereas the tradition of Halloween was about consulting the dead in order to bring them to protect ourselves and our livestock throughout the winter months, the Father has promised that already. If we obey him and love him and obey, observing his holy days, the harvest festival that he has given, he's going to send rain and he's going to protect, he's going to grow our crops and he's going to provide grass for our cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. This is the promise of the Father. Again, quite in contrast with the promises of the pagan Halloween festival of the harvest festival. So he says, furthermore, in verse 16, be careful or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. And that's exactly what Halloween and the other pagan holidays that Christians also observe do to believers, is that they entice us away from worshiping Yahuwah in the way that he desires. And so we're bowing down to other gods, to the traditions and the practices of the nations who worship the stars and who worship the created thing rather than the Creator. Verse 17, then Yahuwah's anger will burn against you, and he will shut the heavens so that it will not rain, and the ground will yield no produce, and you will soon perish, or produce if you prefer, and you will soon perish from the good land Yahuwah is giving you. Verse 18, fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, and tie them as symbols on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads. So that mark on the believer, on the forehead and on the hand, is about obeying the Father's commands, so that he will respond to our obedience and bring these blessings that he has promised, the produce in the field, and all of those good things, the blessings that are listed in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Furthermore, verse 19, teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. So we're not supposed to be teaching our children about Halloween and the pagan customs. We're supposed to be teaching our children the ways of Yahuwah, to walk in the commandments of Yahuwah. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land that Yahuwah swore to give to your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. Hallelujah. And so walking in Yahuwah's ways is what brings the blessings. It's not about calling upon the spirits of the dead and the spirits of lost souls and all that in order to invoke their protection, as though they have any power or authority to protect what is ours. They don't. And so the whole basis of this pagan ritual of Halloween is based in falsehood and lies. It doesn't bring any benefit to the believer, nor does it really bring any benefit to anyone who uses divination to call upon dead spirits. Deuteronomy 12 tells us more about what we're supposed to do about the practices that derive from pagan worship, the worship of the nations of their pagan gods. It says in verse 1, "These are the decrees and laws which you must be careful to follow in the land that Yahuwah, the Elohim of your fathers, has given you to possess, as long as you live in the land. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains and on the hills and under every spreading tree where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. Break down their altars, smash their set-apart stones, and burn their Asherah poles in the fire. Cut down the idols of their gods and wipe out their names from those places. You must not worship Yahuwah your Elohim in their way. But you are to seek the place Yahuwah your Elohim will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for a dwelling. To that place you must go, and there bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give, and your freewill offerings and the firstborn of your herds and flocks." So here's a warning about how not to worship. He says in verse 28, Deuteronomy 12:28, "Be careful to obey all these regulations I am giving you, so that it may always go well with you and your children after you," because we're supposed to be teaching our children these things, "because you will be doing what is good and right in the eyes of Yahuwah your Elohim. Yahuwah your Elohim will cut off before you the nations you are about to invade and dispossess. But when you have driven them out and settled in their land," here's the warning, "and after they have been destroyed from before you, be careful not to be ensnared by inquiring about their gods, saying, 'How do these nations serve their gods? We will do the same.'" So there's a very clear warning here that we're not supposed to look at the pagan customs and rituals and traditions of how they worship, how they call upon the spirits to bless them and their gods to bless them. We're not even to inquire about how they do it, because those gods are going to ensnare us through their traditions and customs to be doing that which is displeasing to Yah, and we're going to end up being, well, our ancestors were kicked out of the land, and we're going to be rejected in the judgment if we do these things. Because that's not what the Father's looking for. He's looking for worship in spirit and in truth. Verse 31, "You must not worship Yahuwah your Elohim in their way, because in worshiping their gods, they do all kinds of detestable things Yahuwah hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods," which we already talked about. "See that you do all I command you. Do not add to it or take away from it." And so this is what the Father wants of his people, not the Halloween nonsense that goes on. He doesn't want us being connected to the world in this way and doing the same things that the world, that the Wiccans and the pagans and all the unbelievers do in order to have fun or for whatever reason they do it. He doesn't want us doing those things. He wants us to be a separated, a holy, a set-apart people. In Deuteronomy 13, another scripture about the warnings against the wrong kind of worship. "If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a miraculous sign or wonder, and if the sign or wonder of which he has spoken takes place, and he says, 'Let us follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them,' and I would suggest to you that that's what Halloween and Christmas are all about. It's an enticement to worship in the way that the pagans worship their gods, to actually be worshiping other gods. Because we're not worshiping our Father in heaven by doing those things. We're following pagan customs and traditions. You must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. Yahuwah your Elohim is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is Yahuwah your Elohim you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him, serve him, and hold fast to him." And so Halloween could very well be a test from the Father to see whether we're not going to follow, to see whether we're going to follow him or go after the pagan way of worshiping. And so I think anybody who understands this message is going to say, I want nothing to do with Halloween because it's taking me away from the true worship and from what pleases him. In Deuteronomy 29, I am making this covenant with its oath, not only with you who are standing here with us today in the presence of Yahuwah, our Elohim, but also with those who are not here today. And the reason I'm going through all these scriptures, a lot of these are in Deuteronomy, it's to show you with emphasis the fact that the Father has clearly laid out for us how he wants to be worshipped. There's no confusion about what we should be doing to worship him and what we shouldn't be doing to worship him. You yourselves know how we lived in Egypt and how we passed through the countries on the way here. You saw among them their detestable images and idols of wood and stone and silver and gold. Make sure there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from Yahuwah our Elohim to go and worship the gods of those nations. Make sure that there is no root among you that produces such bitter poison. When such a person hears the words of this oath, he invokes a blessing on himself. And see if this doesn't describe someone you know. He invokes a blessing on himself and therefore thinks, I will be safe even though I persist in going my own way. This will bring disaster on the watered land as well as on the dry. And so I hear sometimes voiced this idea that I'm protected by Jesus. He died for me. He saved me. I'm protected, and therefore, even if I do some of these pagan things, I'm protected, and nothing is going to go bad for me because Jesus is there for me. And what the Father is saying, this is deception. This is self-deception. That no one should say this. No one should invoke this blessing and say, well, this disaster is not going to come on me. Even if I persist in going my own way, whatever way I want to go, Yahuwah will never be willing to forgive him. And this is a severe statement. If we have this attitude that we can go our own way in spite of what the Father has commanded us, and we persist in that, then the Father will never be willing to forgive this person. His wrath and zeal will burn against that man. All the curses written in the book will fall on him, and Yahuwah will blot out his name from under heaven. Really pretty severe. And that's why it's so important that we understand this about Halloween. Yahuwah will single him out from all the tribes of Israel for disaster, according to all the curses of the covenant written in the book of the law. Your children who follow you in later generations and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the calamities that have fallen on the land and the diseases with which Yahuwah has afflicted it. The whole land will be a burning waste of salt and sulfur, nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which Yahuwah overthrew in fierce anger. All the nations will ask, why has Yahuwah done this to this land? Why this fierce anger, this burning anger? And the answer will be, it is because this people abandoned the covenant of Yahuwah, the Elohim of their fathers, the covenant he made with them when he brought them out of Mitzrayim. And so I would suggest to a Christian audience that our God has not changed. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. If this is Yahuwah's attitude, 3,000 years ago, that when he made this covenant with our ancestors, and he made these promises, if you rebel against me, if you persist in doing wrong, then I'm going to bring all this destruction on you. Why do we think in the New Testament age, in this time when Messiah has died for our sins, that God is not going to act in the same way that he did back then? Because he's looking for an obedient people. And so therefore, he's calling us to be a holy people and not to be engaged in this kind of worshiping according to the traditions of men. Deuteronomy 29 goes on to say they went off and worshipped other gods and bowed down to them, gods they did not know, gods he had not given them. And therefore, Yahuwah's anger burned against this land, so that he brought on it all the curses written in this book. In furious anger and in great wrath, Yahuwah uprooted them from their land and thrust them into another land as it is now. The secret things belong to Yahuwah our Elohim, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow, all the words of this law. And so Father has given us these examples and these secret things, these mysteries, so that we would not stray away from him and be caught in the trap of human customs and traditions and the worshiping in the ways that are unpleasing to him. What does the New Testament say? Just real briefly, a couple things and we'll be done. 3 John verse 11, Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does good is of Elohim. The one who does evil has not seen Elohim. And so how can we worship in a way that is evil at its very core, like the worshiping and the divination practices and rites of the pagan nations around us? How do we think that we can follow in those things and practice those same holidays and traditions and escape the notice of Elohim? And because those things are purely evil, and we've demonstrated that. And so the one who does evil, John says, has not even seen God, has not seen Elohim. So this is one of those things that shows our separation from the world. It shows whether or not we're the true disciples of the Messiah. If we're practicing those evil things, then we're of the evil one. But if we're practicing the good things and following the instructions of the Father, then we are of Elohim and we belong to him. In 2 Corinthians 6, Paul talks a little bit more about this fellowship of light and darkness. He says, do not be bound together with unbelievers, or unequally yoked, as another translation puts it. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? How can we as believers have fellowship with these dark practices and still claim to be in the light? If we're practicing the dark things, then we're in the dark. What harmony has Messiah with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? Or what agreement has the temple of Elohim with idols? For we are the temple of the living Elohim, just as Elohim said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And therefore come out from their midst and be separate, be holy, says Yahuwah, and do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you. So here's a call to come out from those evil practices. So even the New Testament teaches what we looked at extensively in the Old Testament law, is that the Father is calling us out from those practices. He doesn't want us to even consider what the nations do in worshiping their gods. We're to have nothing to do with any of that, but we're to worship him in spirit and in truth. Isaiah 5:20 talks about good and evil. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. In other words, to answer that question I asked at the very beginning, can Christians, because of the work of Messiah on the cross, can Christians make something that is evil into good? And here Isaiah gives us the answer. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. In other words, we can't do it. There's a separation between good and evil. And Messiah didn't die in order to make evil good. He died to separate us from the evil, to destroy the works of the devil, not to enhance them, but to destroy the works of the devil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Nothing good is ever said in the scriptures, anywhere in the Bible, about mixing Yah's things with worldly things. There is no mixing of good and evil. They're two separate things, and that's what the call to be holy is all about. It's to come out and separate from the evil and to do good. Ephesians 5, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. So we're not supposed to be doing the traditions and customs of the nations that came before us, the nations of the world. We're supposed to expose the evil of their deeds, not practice them. And so we can't make good what is evil, what Elohim has declared to be evil. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5, but you, are, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day, he's talking about the day of Yahuwah, would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. Here's another contrast between the day and the night, the light and the darkness. We are not of night, nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, but those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith, and so forth. So again, the contrast between light and darkness that we're to have, and the New Testament teaches this over and over. I'm only giving you a few scriptures from the New Testament here, but it's clear that we are of the day and we're not to partake of the deeds of the darkness, which is what the Halloween thing is all about. It's about what happens in the dark. And then this is the judgment. And this is also my final slide. 4th Gospel, chapter 3, the Messiah said, this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world and men love the darkness rather than the light. For their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But he who practices the truth comes to the light so that his deeds may be manifested as having been wrought in Elohim. And so there's no doubt that that Halloween promotes the practice of darkness and evil and divination and all of those things. The burning of sons and daughters in the fire and those detestable practices of the pagans. And we're to have nothing to do with that as believers in the Messiah. We are in the light and we need to remain in the light and not practice the deeds of the darkness. So here's my summary of Halloween. Halloween is a harvest festival, but believers have their own biblical harvest festival. We have something that we're supposed to be doing, and it's not Halloween. Halloween is also a time for calling up the dead, but we are forbidden to do this. We're strictly warned that if we do this, the wrath of Elohim will fall upon us. We're not to imitate the practices of the nations, nor are we even consider what it is that they do, so that we might, give it a try. Hey, let's give it a try. Let's see how much fun this can be to do the things that the nations do to worship their other gods. Well, God, Elohim, is telling us, don't do that, because you're going to be enticed in doing evil. In the end, it's not going to be a good result for you. Halloween is also a time of darkness, but we are not of the darkness. We are to be children of the light, and we're to walk in the light and not in the darkness. So these are my reasons why I think that Halloween is certainly not a good thing for believers. We shouldn't be doing any aspect of Halloween. We should have nothing to do with the trick-or-treating, the trunk-or-treating, or the apple bobbing, or any of the other things that, wearing costumes, dressing up as witches and goblins and warlocks and heroes and cartoon characters. All of that is of pagan origin, and we are of the light, so let's walk in the light. And so I hope that I know there are other teachings about Halloween out on the internet by good people, but I hope that this had some benefit for you in being able to arm yourself with reasons to give your Christian friends why they shouldn't be doing the Halloween thing. Hallelujah. And that's all I got. What say you?